to have you with me. I hope you had a great weekend. I actually slept. It was glorious. And we had Saturday soccer. Can I just, as an opening here, and you don't need to call it, I just would like to, rhetorical question. Why is it that middle-aged men who buy sports cars are the slowest drivers on the interstate? I went out to grab breakfast this morning and passed a dude who, of course, was driving in the fast lane in his new McLaren. Had to be brand new. It still had tags on it, like the dealer tag on it, or the temp tag. And he was in the fast lane, not going fast. And then when I pulled off the interstate, some dude in a brand new Camaro, of course, is doing like 35 miles an hour in a 50. I don't understand. Just if you're having a midlife crisis, at least step on the gas and get it over with quickly. All right, now that I've got that off my chest, guys, can we talk about Dr. Fauci for a minute? He needs to be taken off the airwaves. It is a public disservice to continue to have Dr. Fauci on television. Here he is on the Sunday shows.
You know, the issue is it depends on what you mean by safe and its relative risk. So let me explain. The first thing you got to realize that when you get vaccinated, your risk of getting infected dramatically diminishes and is very low. So then the obvious question is, why are there any restrictions? There are, because in a certain situation, one can get vaccinated, have no clinical disease at all, but get infected and not even know it, and have replication of virus in your nasopharynx and inadvertently transmit it to somebody else who might actually be unvaccinated and get ill. That's the reason why you want to wear a mask there. The other reason for wearing a mask is that there are variants that are circulating, and although they're unusual, we are seeing breakthrough infections, but we're also seeing variants that are a bit disturbing. Fortunately for us, the 117, which is the variant that was originating in the UK, our vaccines are very effective against them. So when people say, well, why can't I go? You can travel. Your risk is really very low. What the CDC is saying is that it depends on what your level of risk that you want to take. The one thing you want to do is be careful that you don't inadvertently infect someone else, or that given the fact that we have 60 to 70,000 new infections in the community, that is a precarious situation. That's the point. So we don't want people to think that you don't dramatically diminish your risk when you get vaccinated. You absolutely do. The risk is very low. And people will make decisions about what they want to do, and it will be a relative risk. What risk am I willing to take?
That last point is helpful. The rest of the message is not. Here he is with Chuck Todd. That was with Dana Bash. Here he is with Chuck Todd.
Why does a vaccinated person have to wear a mask?
Okay, this is something that as we get more information, it's going to be pulling back that you won't have to. But currently the reason is that when you get vaccinated, you are clearly diminishing dramatically your risk of getting infected. That's one of the things we've got to make sure everybody understands. You dramatically diminish it. However, what happens is that you might get infected and get absolutely no symptoms, not know you're infected, and then inadvertently go into a situation with vulnerable people. And if you don't have a mask, you might inadvertently infect them. Now, there's a small risk of that, but it's there. The other thing is that there may be variants that are circulating. We know New York area has their own variant, a 526. There's a South African variant. Fortunately for us, Chuck, the 117 variant that is dominant in Europe and in UK is also now dominant in the United States. Thank goodness the vaccine works very well against that variant.
Okay. What Dr. Fauci is saying is not wrong. Let's get that out of the way first. What Dr. Fauci is saying is not wrong. There is a chance that you can get the vaccine, become infected, and become asymptomatic, and then spread the vaccine to other people. That's why he wants you to wear a mask. The risk is actually exceedingly low, and there's a difference between technical and practicality. Technically, yes, the lab results show that you can get the virus even though you've been vaccinated and spread it to other people. The lab results show that. But in practice, in reality, there isn't a lot of real world data showing this at all. In fact, the real world data shows overwhelmingly, if you get the vaccine, you're not going to spread it. In fact, overwhelmingly, the data shows that if you have had the virus for at least 6 months, you're probably not going to get the virus again. And also, by the way, if you get the virus and want to get the vaccine, wait 90 days before you get the vaccine. It'll minimize first dose reactions. Here's the message right now in the United States, because of Dr. Fauci, where he is right now. And again, he's doing his job. I don't think he's malicious. He's doing his job. He is stating laboratory fact, but laboratory fact and real world fact don't necessarily always align. And the message right now in the United States of America is go get your vaccine and then don't go back to normal. Go back home, lock your doors, keep your mask on. Go get the vaccine, for which if you're young, you're probably going to have a reaction and not feel well for 24 hours. Go get the vaccine and, hey, risk a very rare blood clot if you're a woman. And then don't go back to normal. Don't dare go back to normal. You wear your mask at all times when you're outside. You possibly could get sick and you will have no side effects whatsoever. You won't even know you're sick and you can get someone else sick. So wear your mask. At this point, should it not be on those who've chosen not to get vaccinated to assume the risk, not on those of us who have gotten the vaccine? It's the way it has been this entire time. The people who didn't want to wear the mask, the people who didn't wash their hands, the people who wanted to gather in crowds, they assumed the risk. At this point, the messaging needs to be, get the vaccine, wait 2 weeks, live your life, no mask. In fact, carry your vaccine card with you. If somebody questions you without a mask, say, hey, I'm vaccinated. Deal with it. The messaging is now keeping people from wanting to get the vaccine. If the message was, go out, get the vaccine, and we can reopen all the small businesses. If the message was, go out, take the vaccine, and we can start life over. If the message was, take the vaccine for the love of your family and your neighbors and small businesses, and let's get America going again, you would have people clamoring to get the vaccine. This just is not helpful. COVID coverage by the U.S. national media is an outlier, a study finds. Bruce Sacerdot, an economics professor at Dartmouth College, noticed something last year about the COVID-19 television coverage he was watching on CNN and PBS. It almost always seemed negative, regardless of what he was seeing in the data or hearing from scientists he knew. When COVID cases were rising in the U.S., the news coverage emphasized the increase. When cases were falling, the coverage instead focused on those places where cases were rising. And when vaccine research began showing promising results, the coverage downplayed it as far as he could tell. If he was not sure whether his perception, but he wasn't sure if his perception was correct. To check, he began working with 2 other researchers, building a database of coverage from every major news network, CNN, Fox News, Politico, the New York Times, and hundreds of other sources in the U.S. and overseas. The researchers then analyzed it with a social science technique that classifies language as positive, neutral, or negative. The results show that Sacerdot's instincts were right, and not just because the pandemic had been mostly a grim story. The coverage by U.S. publications with a national audience has been much more negative than coverage by every other source that the researchers analyzed, including scientific journals, major international publications, and regional U.S. media. The most well-read U.S. media are outliers in terms of negativity, Molly Cook, a co-author of the study, told me. About 87% of COVID coverage in national U.S. media last year was negative. The share was 51% in international media, 53% in U.S. regional media, and 64% in scientific journals. Notably, the coverage was negative in both U.S. media outlets with liberal audiences like MSNBC and those with conservative audiences like Fox News. Sacerdot is careful to emphasize that he does not think journalists usually report falsehoods. The issue is what facts they emphasize. Still, the new study, which the National Bureau of Economic Research has published as a working paper titled Why is All COVID News Bad News, calls for some self-reflection in the media. An impossibility. They will not self-reflect. And part of this, let's be honest, was all about Trump as well. But the negative coverage actually continues. Even now into the Biden administration, the negative coverage is continuing, led by Dr. Fauci telling people, stay home. It doesn't matter. Stay home. It doesn't matter. You can't go outside. You've got to wear your mask. At some point, the assumption of the risk has to take some level of precedent over all of this. The Washington Examiner has a great editorial today to consider. We are fast approaching the point in the coronavirus pandemic at which the supposed cure is almost as bad as the disease. This isn't about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is about the closure and restrictions on civil society, on Main Street, and on businesses where people get together. Governments for over a year have demanded compliance from restaurants, movie theaters, storefronts, gyms, play places, and countless other third places. The closures, the sanitation rules, the capacity limits on these institutions has been based more in fear and outdated practice than in science, but proprietors went along. Yet for many businesses, there was simply no way under these onerous rules to pay the bills. The Decurion Corporation, for example, announced this month the permanent closure of its ArcLight Cinemas and Pacific Theater chain, citing the heavy losses incurred during the pandemic. The two chains in California have been shuttered since March of 2020. This was not the outcome anyone wanted, but despite a huge effort that exhausted all potential options, the companies did not have a viable way forward, a statement read. ArcLight Cinemas and Pacific Theaters also operated venues in Boston, Chicago, Maryland, and the Washington, D.C. metro area. They are not the only business casualties of the strict pandemic. In Baltimore, Maryland, Ida B's Table announced last month it was shutting down for good, striking another pandemic-era blow for the city's downtown, as the Baltimore Sun put it. It comes after the home decor store Trough announced it would shutter all after 14 years in business. In Washington, D.C., an estimated 375 businesses have shuttered since March of 2020. Illinois has lost more than 500,000 jobs since the beginning of 2020, according to the Chicago Tribune, of which nearly 43% were jobs in the leisure and hospitality sector. In the world of retail, at least 13 major businesses, including Brooks Brothers, Guitar Center, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, and Pier 1, have fallen into bankruptcy, each citing the pandemic as the catalyst for their Chapter 11 filings. Killing these businesses means harming downtowns and main streets. These are the very predictable side effects of the non-medical interventions the state and local governments have imposed and the federal government has recommended. At what point can we just let Americans be responsible for their own actions? At what point can we say the burden of risk is on the unvaccinated? At what point can we say you've got to decide? There was a time, let's put this in perspective. There was a time in this country where there was a lot unknown about this virus, and it risked overwhelming hospitals, and in some areas of the country, overwhelmed hospitals. There are parts of this country that have done better than others. You would not know this from a lot of the media coverage. The media coverage, for example, of Brian Kemp in Georgia, relentlessly negative when he was the first governor to reopen his state, and yet his state has outperformed every other state economically, including Florida, where Ron DeSantis was the second governor to reopen his state, and his lockdown was barely a minimal lockdown. And yet the media coverage of him as well was relentless, while upbeat and positive about Andrew Cuomo, who has wrecked New York's economy, or Gavin Newsom, who's wrecked his, or Gretchen Whitmer, who's wrecked hers. Schools in blue parts of the country continue to be closed. I don't know if any of y'all saw, it went viral on social media this weekend, the Bill Maher monologue from his real-time show on HBO on Friday night, pointing out that overwhelmingly the transmission of the virus among kids is small, and yet blue states are scared to death to reopen, and they're forcing parents to stay home with their kids, putting them behind red state America. At this point, the federal government's messaging on the virus and the vaccine is terrible. At this point, the government needs an intervention. At this point, the message needs to change very quickly to take the risk. Get out and live your life. Get vaccinated, go back to life. Get vaccinated, return to your shops. Get vaccinated, return to restaurants. Get vaccinated, stop wearing your mask. Get vaccinated and live life and rebuild America. But nobody in government seems to want to do that. Nobody in government seems to want to allow you at this point to take a risk. And again, Dr. Fauci, the man's not malicious. But the lab and the real world are two different things. And right now in the real world, it's time for people to go back outside, if they can take their mask off if they've been vaccinated, and get back to living.
You can follow Erick around social media at
Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. My buddy Steve Berman lives up in Atlanta, wrote with me for a while at the Resurgent. He's got a Substack, The Racket News, and he is dealing with the fallout of the lockdowns and school policy. It's just silly. He writes this today. As we near the last months of the 2020-2021 school year, the government data shows close to half of elementary and middle schools are open, clearing the rather low bar for the Biden administration's goal of a majority of K-8 schools open for full-time in-person classes by his 100th day in office. Schools being open doesn't translate to business as usual, however, since working parents have a sort of Damocles hanging over their heads. At any time, a school can declare a student quarantined for some number of days, a week or more, based on their own contact tracing and COVID-19 protocols. A student determination of high risk based on a school's rules sends the school home, and for younger children, that means parents need to take time off or find care for the student. Depending on the school district, this even applies when the student in question has already been infected with COVID-19. It even applies when the teacher or the parents have been vaccinated. It even applies if parents order an antibody test for the student, depending solely on the school district's own internal policy. How long after infection is a student considered safe not to get reinfected? By the CDC, in a single Kentucky study, reinfection is believed to be rare. The study in question found 5 recurrent COVID-19 patients, all women ranging in age from 67 to 99, after 90 days, and all were living in skilled nursing home facilities. The National Institutes of Health paper, published in December of 2020, declared minimal information on the sustained positivity of SARS-CoV-2 is available in the pediatric population. No pediatric data of reinfection is available. The resulting study on the available household data, including children, found that in the small number of patients retested for sustained positivity, most were asymptomatic, overwhelmingly female, mostly Black or Hispanic, with an average age of 9.9 years. And now, here we come to Fulton County, the metro Atlanta area in Georgia. A student who was infected over 90 days ago and is found by a system of contact tracing developed during the heat of the pandemic, where the R0 value will be sent home for 10 days. No ifs, ands, or buts. No information on who was infected, HIPAA regulations, and all that. It's perfectly understandable. There's a ripple effect. So this is happening now to him in his county. His kid had COVID-19 with the rest of the family in October and is being made to stay home. The kid who tested positive, they know who it was through the parental grapevine, wasn't even in the classroom where his kid was on 2 days of in-person school held last week. But the school says their contact tracing is accurate. They know it wasn't. They know their son never came into contact, or their child never came into contact with his other child. The school says 90 days is the maximum immunity for children in their procedures, without any kind of scientific evidence to back up the arbitrary 90 days. The high-risk designation and quarantine go a lot further than one kid. It affects families, work, relatives, doctors. It's a scarlet letter. They've already been through this last October. Their kid's not sick. Their kid's not going to get sick. Their kid wasn't even in the room with the other kid, and yet the school is making their kid, stay home. This is just madness at this point. This really is overkill. And here, this is such a problem. What we're getting at and what we're getting to is nobody's going to treat any of this stuff seriously. And so when it's time for us to treat it seriously, who's going to do it? Who's going to want to treat it seriously? Nobody's going to. Politicians are ruining their credibility. Dr. Fauci is ruining his credibility. School systems are ruining their credibility. And by the way, if the Democrats haven't been paying attention, there is a political issue here. A lot of parents are seething with rage at school unions in states where school unions are keeping schools closed under pressure. And that's going to come back to haunt the Democratic politicians tied to the school unions. It may not help the Republicans, but it could certainly elevate more moderate Democrats over the wokes right now around the country. And the Democrats are convinced that their safe message, we're going to keep you safe, we're not going to keep this right. And by the way, it's not working. Look at what's happening in Michigan. The governor of Michigan is now blaming spring breakers for her surge that began happening before spring break. And the media is doing everything they can to cover for Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. The whole thing is just nonsense. Hello there. Glad to have you with me today. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I sure hope it is beautiful where you are. I see blue sky outside my window today. Okay. Can I have a moment of confession? My son had soccer Saturday afternoon. You know, the weather, I don't know what's going on with the weather. I don't. Where I am on Friday, we had a 50% chance. Thursday, there was a 50% chance of rain. It wound up being blue sky almost all day. And on Saturday, there was a 70% chance of rain. It was slightly overcast for part of the day, and then that was it. I mean, literally, there was just nothing. There was nothing. And I was thinking, yes, it's going to get canceled. I mean, I want my kid to play soccer, but I also want to sleep. And does that make me bad? I think we all go through this. But I mean, you wake up and suddenly it's blue sky outside, which is great. The weather was fantastic. We got a little bit sunburned watching the game. I did put on sunscreen still. I'm so white, y'all. I burned with sunscreen on. But I'm like, oh. I mean, it's not that you want your kid to lose, but if they win, you got to go to the tournament. All right. Y'all, I'll go through. If you're a parent, you've been through this, you understand. Slate is driving so Slate, for those of you who don't know, Slate is a left of center publication. Slate used to be, it was called a Zine back in the day, an electronic magazine. And it was left of center, funded by the Washington Post. It spun off. People on the internet joke about Slate takes because Slate inevitably has some of the dumbest political takes you will find online from the left. And Slate is making people on the left mad because of this. This is the actual headline that is making people mad. It's about time for us to stop wearing masks outside. And the subtitle, briefly passing someone on the sidewalk just isn't risky. One of the last times, this is from Shannon Paulus, one of the last times I stepped outside my Brooklyn apartment without a mask on was in early spring 2020, just before the state issued a mask mandate. I remember because as my dog peed on a tree, a neighbor asked me pointedly where my mask was. Where I live, almost everyone wears a mask when they go outside. If a person sipping from an iced coffee with their mask pulled down approaches someone else on the sidewalk coming the other way, they will usually yank the mask back up as if they've been caught partially undressed. The other day, I noticed a woman sitting on a hill in the middle of a field with her face covered. There was no one near her. For a while now, this has felt a little unnecessary, if understandable, given that we were still learning things about the virus and we're still trying to be as careful as possible. But now, as we've come to know more about the virus, as vaccinations are ramping up, and as we've tried to figure out how to live with some level of COVID in a sustainable way, masking up outside when you're at most briefly crossing paths with people is starting to feel barely understandable. Look, I believe masks, and even shaming, she puts in parentheses, are indispensable in controlling the spread of the coronavirus. Despite early waffling, public health experts are virtually unanimous in support of them and have remained so even as our early dedication to scrubbing surfaces and Cloroxing veggies wound down. In other words, as the pandemic has progressed, so has our understanding of what safety measures are truly most useful and which aren't worth the alcohol wipes. And I would like to calmly suggest that now is the time we should consider no longer wearing masks when we walk around outside. People have lost their minds over this on the left. How can you be against the mask? What do you have against me? You know, I don't care if you wear the mask. When I go to the grocery store, if there's a sign to please wear a mask, I put a mask on. I also am mindful that my wife has a health condition, and I try to be a little more careful than probably you need to be. But I saw somebody the other day get out of their car at a gas station in middle frickin' Georgia and put a mask on at the gas pump. I want to say that again because you need this visual in your head. There's what is it now? It used to be a Flash Foods. It's a Circle K near my house. Someone literally got out of their car and put a mask on at the gas pump. You know, I have kept forever a bottle of hand sanitizer in my car when I go to the gas pump and pump gas. I open the car door from the outside, and the first thing I do is grab the hand sanitizer, and I've done that pre-COVID. Well, that won't change. But the idea of putting a mask on while I'm at the gas pump, and now people are literally on the left angry with this magazine, this website, for suggesting that we shouldn't wear masks. You know, if you want to wear a mask, go wear a mask. Wear a mask. I don't care if you wear a mask. Double bag it if you want. Maybe it'll keep you from procreating as well. But the rest of us, we don't need to. Seeing Joe Biden the other day across a table from a diplomat wearing 2 masks. Why? The man's been vaccinated. He doesn't need to. The person he was talking to, all the people in the room, I think, were vaccinated. I don't know why we need to keep up pretenses. Or like, look at the freaking funeral for Prince Philip this weekend. You've got everybody spaced out, 30 people. They've all been vaccinated, I believe. The Queen certainly has, and she's wearing a mask all by herself. They're spread out. The 30-person cap, number one, makes no sense. Why? Because in that same chapel for Easter, they had 100 people. And now suddenly only 30 could be there for the funeral. I mean, it was still a very powerful ceremony. Pomp and pageantry and all of that. But still, it was ridiculous that only 30 people could be there with masks on. The Queen vaccinated. Most of the people there vaccinated or have had COVID. They're not going to get it again. They're not going to spread it. At some point, we've lost our minds as a society to freak out over that, which gets me to Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who has kept her entire state locked down forever. The Supreme Court of Michigan has been ruling against her. The state legislature has been overriding her vetoes at this point, taking power away from her because she's been so heavy-handed. Now the virus is on the rise, and who's she blaming?
Well, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to whether or not everyone does their part. That's the most important thing. This variant, the B117 variant, is what is growing so quickly here in Michigan. We have the second most of it, then I think right after Florida. At least that was the last data that I saw. Michigan and Florida are not next to each other. But this is the time of the year that snowbirds come home from Florida, where people are going on spring break, and all of these things can contribute to spread. And that's why we're imploring people to take this seriously, mask up, get tested. If you've been around someone who's positive, stay home.
We got spring breakers. Spring breakers are to blame all of this. Y'all, at some point, the burden of risk has to be on the unvaccinated, but also some of these governors the media has been praising need to be held accountable because their policies have in various ways resulted in this. Let's be real clear and honest with one of the things that happened in Michigan. She kept people in their homes for so long. Now that they're able to come out, they're rushing out with gusto. Many of them not taking precautions they probably should have taken, in large part because they were in their houses for so long. They're just ready to get out and be done with it. There was no easing out of it in Michigan, and the whole state is now exploded in ways with the virus because of her handling of it. Small businesses in Michigan have been wrecked. This is going to be a political fallout for her. But more importantly, there's this. The media has covered for her repeatedly. The media has covered for Gretchen Whitmer. They've apologized for her. At the same time, they've condemned a bunch of Republican governors whose outcomes have been far better than hers because she has a D next to her name. She's a female Democrat. She was whispered as a potential vice presidential pick for Joe Biden. The media loves her. And they will let her come on and apologize and deflect and blame Republicans and spring breakers and everyone else. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis still gets blamed in media hatchet jobs. Ross Douthat in the New York Times has a very interesting column on Ron DeSantis. He is the Republican Autopsy. After the Republican Party suffered a surprising, to Republicans, defeat in the 2012 election, the Republican National Committee famously commissioned an autopsy that tried to analyze how the party had fallen short. It made a range of recommendations, but they were distilled by the headlines and the wishful thinking of certain party elites into a plan for the GOP to win back the presidency, mostly by shifting left on immigration. Then, of course, Donald Trump came along and put that particular vision to the torch. After Trump went down to his own defeat, it was clear that there wouldn't be a repeat of the autopsy. Not only because the last experience ended badly, but because Trump's narrative would not allow it. To publicly analyze what went wrong for Republicans in 2020 would be to concede that the incumbent president had somehow failed, impossible, that Joe Biden's victory was totally legitimate, unlikely, and that the party somehow might need to move on from Trump himself. Unthinkable. He should have used inconceivable. But just because there hasn't been a formal reckoning, thick with focus groups and bullet points, doesn't mean the GOP elites don't have a theory of how to fix their party's problems in time for the next presidential cycle. It's just that this time the theory is less a message than a man. Right now, the party's autopsy for 2020 and its not Trump hopes for 2024 are made flesh in the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. The proximate cause of the enthusiasm for DeSantis is his handling of the pandemic and the media's attempted manhandling of him. When the Florida governor began reopening Florida last May, faster than some experts advised, he was cast as a feckless mini-Trump, the mayor from Jaws, complete with open, crowded beaches, the ultimate case study in Florida man's stupidity. A year later, DeSantis is claiming victory. His state's COVID deaths per capita are slightly lower than the nation's, despite an aged and vulnerable population. His strategy of sealing off nursing homes while reopening schools for the fall looks like social and scientific wisdom, and his gubernatorial foils, the liberal governors cast as heroes by the press, have stumbled and fallen in various ways. Meanwhile, many media attacks on his governance have fizzled or boomeranged, most notably a 60 Minutes hit piece that claimed to have uncovered corruption in the state's use of the public supermarket for its vaccination efforts, but produced no smoking gun, conspicuously edited out much of DeSantis' rebuttal, and fell afoul of fact checkers. The governor's public outrage in response was justified, but he must have been privately delighted, since there's nothing that boosts the standing of a Republican politician quite like being attacked deceptively or unsuccessfully by the press. Now, let me skip down some of this to get you part of it here. DeSantis' career has been a distillation of this Florida Republican adaptability. Born in Jacksonville, he went from being a double Ivy Leaguer, Yale and Harvard Law, to a Tea Party congressman, to a zealous Trump defender who won the president's endorsement for his gubernatorial campaign. A steady march rightward, it would seem, except that after winning an extremely narrow victory over Andrew Gillum in 2018, DeSantis swung back to the center with educational and environmental initiatives and African-American outreach that earned him 60% approval ratings in his first year in office. Combine that moderate swing with the combative persona DeSantis has developed during the pandemic, and you can see a model for post-Trump Republicanism that might be able to hold the party's base while broadening its appeal. You can think of it as a series of careful two steps. Raise teacher salaries while denouncing critical race theory and left-wing indoctrination. Spend money on conservation and climate change mitigation through a program that carefully doesn't mention climate change itself. Choose a Latina running mate while backing E-Verify laws. Welcome conflict with the press, but try to make sure you're on favorable ground. It's not a bad idea. He's been making the rounds, DeSantis has. He's been wooing donors. He met privately in Charleston with the Bradley Foundation members. He wasn't even on the agenda. He showed up and wowed the crowd for an hour. Now, there are others out there as well who are trying. There are others out there as well who are moving. What I find so notable about DeSantis right now is there have been a lot of hit jobs against him, but none of them from the right. No hit jobs from Republicans. You know, there have been Republican right-wing hit jobs against Josh Hawley now, against Ted Cruz, against Nikki Haley. Nothing coming against Ron DeSantis yet. It might happen. And I realize 2024 is still a long way off. He's still got to get through 2022. And you can be sure the Democrats are going to do everything they can in 2022 to throw DeSantis off his game and try to defeat him as governor of Florida, because they know if he gets to 2024, he's going to be formidable. Events change things, certainly show. But right now, Republicans are looking at him thinking, you know what? He's probably the guy. In fact, however good polling is, and it's looking increasingly like it's not, there is a poll of Republicans out there that shows him now tied with Donald Trump, should they both run in 2024 in the Republican primary. But more so, he's dominant over everyone else if Trump doesn't run. And I kind of believe that's the case. I got a lot of friends of mine who continually now have these conversations of, I wasn't a fan of his, I didn't particularly like him, but I'm really impressed with what he's done. And I like the way he fights the press. It reminds me of Trump. Even the people who hate Trump, they say, yeah, I wasn't with him because he was with Trump, but he's actually been a really good governor. To watch the media try to savage this guy and protect someone like Gretchen Whitmer tells you everything you need to know. The media in the United States has concluded that he is the biggest threat to Kamala Harris's 2024 run.
You can follow Erick around social.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425 if you want to be on the program. Are you guys suffering from allergies? Are you suffering from odors in your house? Are you suffering from mold in your air vents or mildew? The Eden Pure Thunderstorm is for you. It is a portable air purifier. You can hold it in your hand. You can even take it with you in your car. It's great. We use it in our house. We use it in my son's room. It helps him with his allergies. It'll help you too. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm, you can get it by going to EdenPureDeals.com, and you will get a fantastic deal, $10 off their lowest sale price. If you use the code word Erick, my name, at checkout, ERICK. It's EdenPureDeals.com. Now, what you need to worry about is you're not going to have to breathe dirty air again. It doesn't have a filter to replace, which is really useful. It destroys viruses and bacteria. It eliminates odors. It doesn't cover them up. It eliminates them. And in our house, it does work. We see it with our son, who's not waking up with a snoggy, clogged up nose as he sleeps at night because of allergies and everything else. It really does work. It is a just brilliantly designed small device, fits in your hand. I've got a big air purifier for our back sunroom, and the thing is the size of R2-D2. Can't carry it around. It weighs a ton. This one, you can hold it in your hand. You can take it with you camping. You can take it in your car. You can take it wherever you need to go. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm. EdenPureDeals.com is the website. Eden, like the Garden of Eden. EdenPureDeals.com. Have you all seen this Pew survey out? The Pew Research has a study that shows Joe Biden's job approval rating, if I can talk, is 59%. 59% Joe Biden's job approval rating. Democrats have an oversampling of 30% in the poll. They made up 65.5% of the survey. Republicans made up 34.5% of the survey. We're gonna hear more of this. There's all these. It's in a 50-50. First of all, does it really make sense in a 50-50 country where the nation is bitterly divided? Does it really make sense? Nope, not really. Of course not. This comes at the time, though. If it does make sense, there's an explanation for it. Newsbusters study. Once top Trump bashers, TV news now loves Joe Biden. For 4 years, the liberal media led the left's fierce resistance to the Trump administration, slamming the president night after night after night. Now, a new study by the Media Research Center finds the broadcast EV newscasts have executed a full flip-flop as they aid and abet President Joe Biden's administration. During his first 3 months in office, the broadcast EV news networks have showered Biden with 59% positive press. 4 years ago, the same programs were hammering Trump with 89% negative press. For the study, MRC analysts reviewed all ABC, CBS, and NBC evening news coverage of Biden and his administration from January 20th through April 9th. Total coverage amounted to a hefty 726 minutes, 18% of all evening news airtime, and that's still just a small fraction of the 1,900 minutes these broadcasts spent deploring Trump and his team when we study the same newscast during the same period in 2017. The shift in tone is even more dramatic. 4 years ago, Trump faced hellishly negative coverage right from the beginning. Our study at the time showed 89% negative coverage of the new president on these 3 evening newscasts, an unprecedented hostility that would characterize the media's approach for the next 4 years. Today, President Biden faces a far friendlier media landscape. We found 59% positive coverage of his administration during those first weeks, a continuation of the positive coverage the networks treated him to during last year's presidential campaign. We shouldn't be surprised by any of this. One of the biggest surprises to me is how relentlessly negative still the media freak out over COVID is, even with Biden as president now, continuing to tell you to lock your doors and keep your mask on at home, Clorox your fruit still. They just can't help themselves. And, you know, I got to say, it's completely predictable. It is predictable. You and I both know that this is going to happen. What is more remarkable to me is how Republicans are still able to penetrate the conversations out there and do as well as they are, frankly, even as the media itself works overtime to try to sabotage any Republican whatsoever, like Ron DeSantis, for example, and yet we're still able to bypass the mainstream media and get our voice out there. Hello and welcome. How are you? Glad to have you with me. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can email me, eric@ewerickson.com. And you can always find me on social media. Okay, look, I'm pulling up the story here. Do you remember the guy in Florida who had the white van, who was targeting members of the press? He was this Hispanic guy who loved Donald Trump, thought the president was getting unfair media coverage. He was not a stable, well individual, and he decided he was going to hunt members of the press. I don't think it is appreciated enough in conservative circles how that event, I think, really triggered and broke some members of the media. I don't want to go into a ton of details here, but I know some things that I don't think really made it into reports. And I don't want to invade people's privacy. And they themselves don't want to talk about it because they don't want to inspire others. But if you're wondering, you've got some members of the press who you have considered, I mean, they may be left of center, but they've tried to be fair, they've tried to be objective, and they finally just lost it. And you're like, what happened to this person? How did Donald Trump break this person? The guy in Florida had not just the information on a number of reporters who you would know in the national press, but also their families, their kids, where their kids went to school. He wasn't just targeting the members of the press to kill, but wanted to harm their families. And it came after the president said repeatedly that the press was the enemy of the public. And you can think the president was fair in saying they're not given the relentless coverage of him. But the way members of the press who were on the hit list by this guy interpreted it is that this guy was coming after them because of what the president did and what the president said. I'm not going to litigate it with you as to whether their conclusions were fair or not. It was a crazy person down in Florida. But one of the things I do think that came out of this was a more relentless hostility from members of the press who had otherwise covered the president, I think, more fairly than their peers. Maybe not fairly, but certainly more fairly. And yet they were on the list. They were targeted. Their families were targeted. Their children were targeted. And I think to some degree it kind of broke them. And I can see why. I say all of that because I think as well at this point, there also must be a level of humility in the press when it comes to covering stories, because I think that they're going to inspire more people to be like the crazy guy in Florida. They're going to inspire more people to behave like that and to treat the press as a real physical real enemy, not imagined, not hypothetical, not metaphorical, but real. And I say this because of this guy, Jason Wynn. Jason Wynn is a reporter for ABC4 in Salt Lake City. Kyle Rittenhouse is the young man who killed people in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was arguably in self-defense. If you watch the video, that is disputed. Was he a white supremacist or not? He went with his mother or not? There are all sorts of facts, I think, that we haven't gotten a clear picture of as to what happened. But a legal fund was set up for Kyle Rittenhouse, who was presumed by many to have been acting in self-defense. He had been there trying to help police officers quell the violence, whether he should have been or not. And a legal fund was set up for him and people donated. People around the country donated. Someone hacked the crowdfunding website that set up the fund for Kyle Rittenhouse. And the data breach was made public. And The Guardian, a UK publication, began publishing the details of the people who gave to Kyle Rittenhouse. Jason Wynn is a reporter in Salt Lake City for ABC4. He showed up at the door at the private home of Craig Shepard, a paramedic in Salt Lake City, for the sin of having given $10 to the fund 5 days after Rittenhouse shot the protesters. They also reached out to the West Valley City Fire Department and were made aware, and an investigation was launched. This man will not be placed on administrative leave while an investigation is underway. Why is he being investigated? He's being investigated because this reporter, Jason Wynn, decided to make a big deal of him giving $10 to this legal fund. This reporter not only showed up at his home, but contacted his employer for privately making a donation. The only reason the news media knows about it is because the data was hacked, and they've seized on it to harass a private citizen. Now, you can be opposed to Kyle Rittenhouse. You can be opposed to supporting him. But if you can't understand why a private citizen shouldn't be harassed for making a private donation to a cause, you're wired differently from me. But I would caution you that in the 1980s and the 1990s, there were a lot of unpopular causes on the left. Gay rights, gay marriage, advocacy of transgenderism, NAMBLA, you name it. A lot of socially left causes. And a lot of people privately donated to those causes. Can you imagine if the media was able to get leaked donors and at the time show up at people's homes or schools or places of employment and harass them? Hey, why is this employee of yours here in Utah, in a highly Mormon conservative state, giving money to an organization funding gay marriage? Now, you can say, well, gay marriage is perfectly, yes, it's not only fine and legal in this country, but at one point, highly controversial, particularly in places like Utah. What would have happened then? Would you have liked it then, or are you just fine with it because it's a cause you don't like now? The fact that reporters lack the discernment or the personal reflection or the humility to not do this is going to cause more people like the idiot nutter in Florida in the white van. The media is provoking violence against itself because the media has no sense of humility in what it should or should not do in its effort to out and shame those it does not like. And private citizens who made a private donation to something, the data of which only came about because of a hack. This news channel, ABC4 in Salt Lake City, should be condemned for doing it, and this reporter, Jason Wynn, should be condemned for doing what he did. Because it's not reporting, it's harassment. And they want to hide behind it. Reporters, every reporter I know believes that any sort of news they generate is legitimate. Any sort of news they generate is lawful. This comes at a time the public overwhelmingly distrusts the media. We've seen CNN try to destroy the life of a retiree in Florida who shared something on Facebook that turned out to be Russian propaganda. She had no idea about it. They literally showed up at her house. We've seen reporters go after the guy in New York who doctored the video of Nancy Pelosi that went up on Facebook. They tried to go after him. We've seen them go after the computer store owner in Delaware who made public Hunter Biden's laptop. Anyone who potentially runs afoul of the prevailing narrative and zeitgeist of the liberal media becomes a target, no matter their job, no matter their occupation, no matter it was a $10 donation. Reporters are going to become targets. People are going to target them for harm because of what this guy did, because there are crazy people out there who are going to literally view the reporters as enemies of the people. They will say Donald Trump is right. It's time to go to war with these people because they're out to destroy us. Because the media, this is the craziest thing to me is I don't know very many reporters who won't defend what this Jason Wynn did in Utah. I don't know many reporters who won't. This is one of the things that the left has done is they're weaponizing political donations so that the media harasses people. The left has done this as well. The left likes public disclosure of donations so they can go harass the people and make it painful for people who support causes they don't like. When you start harassing people for giving donations to causes you don't like, you are engaged in undermining American democracy by sending the mob against your opponents. And when the media does the same thing, it shows the media on your side stifling democracy because someone gave to a cause you find unpopular. This leads ultimately to violence. Not acceptable, but expected. It's unfortunate, but it's going to happen. When people are having their lives destroyed because they're giving to conservatives, they're giving to causes like Kyle Rittenhouse, they're supporting Donald Trump, bad things happen. And by the way, the media deserves part of the blame. Yes, the crazy people, the ones who do the violence, are to blame, but the media provokes it, and they justify it, and they get defensive when you think it's bad. They defend themselves, and they get mad at you. This news channel should apologize for trying to wreck the life of a private citizen who gave money to a cause they've decided they don't like. This should not be a news story, and yet it is. Something wicked their way will come. That they don't even see it is part of the problem. And that they justify it is part of the problem. This doesn't end well for any of us, by the way. That y'all, listen, we should not, let's be clear here, we should not live our lives around, are we going to provoke crazy person? We shouldn't do that. But when you're the media and you're doing stuff like this, you inspire and embolden a class of people to lash out at you. And maybe they want to take the risk, that's fine. But there's also the side story here of why should this be a legitimate story? People give money to causes all the time. This cause, the information was hacked. You know, they what was it, on Twitter? They shut down on Twitter. They shut down the New York Post's account because the story about Hunter Biden's laptop was supposedly hacked. It was hacked. We're not going to let them run the story. Here comes a hack, and the media's sending a camera to a guy's private home. You know, when the great war against the press eventually comes, I will sit back on my front porch with my glass of bourbon and my cigar in my rocking chair, and I will say, I told you so.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Erick
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Speaking of media narratives out there, the CNN ran a graphic, went viral over the weekend, of gun violence, mass shootings, they say, in the past month. It looks like there's been Wilmington, North Carolina, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Essex, Pennsylvania or Maryland, Cleveland, Ohio, River Grove, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, Indianapolis, Indiana, Atlanta, Georgia, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Houston, Texas, Yazoo City, Mississippi, Dallas, Texas, Aliceville, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, Boulder, Colorado, Gresham, Oregon, Stockton, California, Orange, California. I may get the states. I'm zooming in on the map. It's kind of hard to see where the arrow goes. But nonetheless, you get the point. Mass shootings in the past month. When Republicans become president of the United States and control Congress, the American news media suddenly rediscovers homelessness. Homelessness is on the rise. It's like homelessness disappears. I will remember to the day I die, Rush Limbaugh, the day after Donald Trump became president, Barack Obama was still in the White House for another couple of months, and Rush Limbaugh noted that we would soon be hearing stories of homelessness again. And within 24 hours, I think it was the Washington Post, did a big story on the rise of homelessness in America, the forgotten people. When Republicans take power in Washington, homelessness becomes a problem. And the heartless, cold, heartless GOP, their policies, they're all about it. Well, when Democrats become president, the media goes all in on mass shootings. You would think mass shootings don't happen when Republicans are president. And the moment a Democrat becomes president, all hell breaks loose. It's not really the case, but what the media does is they redefine what a mass shooting is from the FBI standard to 4 people get shot. Oftentimes it's gang and criminal violence. It's not actually some random shooter like what happened in Indianapolis or in Boulder. It's gang violence and crime. It's the police and criminals shooting at each other. And the media amplifies this in the same way they tried to overstate the election reform bill in Georgia because they want to build a moral case for reform. When Democrats take Washington, the media goes all in on gun control. And if they can play up every story of gun violence imaginable and overstate as many claims as possible, they hope they can persuade the public to get on board the Democrat agenda and get them some gun control reform. It's all about the moral case. It's all about building up the case. It undermines it undermines the facts. It undermines the reality. But there's something else going on here as well with this list, with very few exceptions. They want to say that the Republican gun plan isn't working. The Republican proposals aren't working. In fact, this guy who he went viral with this, Brian Tyler Cohen, he's a left-wing social media guy, showed the CNN picture and said, "Hey, Republicans, your way isn't working." Well, I'm looking at this list, and I'm not sure which of these cities is controlled by a Republican. Maybe there are 1 or 2 of these cities that are Republican. Overwhelmingly, they're Democrats. Not only are they Democrat, a number of these have district attorneys that were funded by the George Soros project that was designed to get left-wing district attorneys elected. This isn't a failure of Republican policies. This isn't a failure of Republicans. This is a failure of Democrats who have sparked a crime wave. Take Atlanta, Georgia, the one I'm most familiar with. In Atlanta, Georgia, there's a mayor there, Keisha Lance Bottom. She and the district attorney, Paul Howard, who is running for re-election, decided to make the police the bad guys. Anytime the police did something caught on film that people could say was bad, even if it wasn't, even if they didn't know the facts, the police were the fall guys. Multiple police officers were fired and charged with crimes, even though they were lawfully policing. So the police in Atlanta just gave up. Said, screw you all, we're not going to go do this. We're going to get arrested for doing our job. Sparked a massive crime wave. Gang violence is up. Burglary's up. Aggravated assault is up. You had a shootout with the police Just the other day, that, by the way, is the mass shooting in Atlanta. It was a shootout with police officers. Multiple police officers wound up in the hospital because of it. But all of this is predictable when the Democrats decide to go easy on crime and gangs get fired up, drug crimes go up, aggravated assaults go up, burglaries go up. You spark a crime wave. To point out these cities around America and say this is a Republican problem. No, this very literally is the failure of Democratic policies in urban areas around this country that has led to a mass crime wave. But far be it for us to point that out. The media wants us to deal with guns. You know, the way to deal with guns is to crack down on crime in this country. Gun violence is on the rise, not because people are coming out of lockout and they've lost their minds. Gun violence is not going up because of crazy people deciding to gun down others. Gun violence is going up because crime is on the rise, and many of the criminal have guns, and the Democrat solution is to take them all away from the law-abiding citizen. Maybe they need to rethink this. Give us all guns and teach us how to use them. That'll help us cut down on the crime. But, of course, we can't do that. We got to be like Australia. We got to take everybody's guns away. That's the solution. That's the only solution. We can't think any differently. We got to go with all the countries that don't have a Second Amendment and do what they did. That's the ticket. It's not going to work. But, man, they sure did walk into that with this graphic at CNN. All these Democrat cities having crime waves, and somehow it's the GOP fault. Nah, I think it's the Democrats' failures to be law and order. Well, you know, I've been around long enough to know that oftentimes the media can't see things coming because the media is in a bubble with the left. So, for example, the American media tends to play up Republican divisions more than Democrat divisions. One, because they want to score points against the GOP, but also they can't see the divisions within the Democratic Party. They can't see the forest for the trees because they're in the bubble with the GOP. Phil Boas is the editor of the Arizona Republic. And he's got this piece, Sure, Democrats, try to pack the Supreme Court. You'll help save the Republican Party. That's right, Democrats. Show us who you are. Don't be satisfied with the House, the Senate, or the White House. Go take control of the Supreme Court, too, and pronto. There can be no division of power. All power must be yours, so carry on. Unmask. Let Americans get a good look at their would-be masters. The wreckage of the Republican Party is strewn across Washington, and Donald Trump is pacing the long shadows at Mar-a-Lago, still fuming at Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence. So there's no better time to strike. Go for it, Democrats. Pack the court. You've got a plan to pack the court with 4 new justices, and nothing says unity like Democratic dominance. Soon you can add the whole of the federal government to your grip on the culture, academia, journalism, entertainment, sports, philanthropy, and now even corporate America. As an earlier president once said, elections have consequences. With your 50-50 plus 1 split of the Senate and your hulking 6-person majority in the 435-member House, you have all the mandate you need to control the court, to control all of us. Make all your policy fantasies come true. Your Green New Deal, defund the police, reparation for slavery, the $15 minimum wage, critical race theory, soaring corporate taxes. They can all be a river to your people. Please don't read this as sour grapes. This is encouragement. After the Capitol riot, many of us conservatives thought the Republican Party would spend the next decade in the wilderness, but you won't let that happen. Your hard push to the left is awakening conservatives across the country, and it began in Georgia. Major League Baseball had just pulled its all-star game from Atlanta. Homegrown Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines were signaling there would be consequences for Georgia's new voter reform law. The law had been chiseled down in the legislative process to a rather pedestrian voter reform measure that, on the whole, makes voting easier in the state. The president called the Georgia law the new Jim Crow amid hundreds of corporations and CEOs inveighing against Georgia and other red states, but the expected hasn't happened. Georgia Republicans aren't folding, they're fighting. The Atlanta Journal tells the story. The weekend meeting of the Cobb County GOP was as packed as it had been. A crowd so thick it spilled out the doorway gathered to hear Governor Brian Kemp, who was rewarded with a standing ovation by grassroots Republican for his defense of an election law that included new voting restrictions. If there was ever a time for us to re-engage and reunite and fight the good fight, it's now, Kemp said, drawing more applause as he invoked the corporate backlash to the law that led Major League Baseball to ditch Georgia by moving its all-star game. The Democrats are doing what only a few weeks ago looked impossible. They're rallying the Republican Party. Kemp, who seemed doomed in his 2022 quest for re-election, now enjoys a strong win at his back, and Georgia conservatives are shaking their fists at their corporate titans, reminding them that Republicans drink Coke and fly Delta. There's a future after Trump, and Republicans can finally see it. With Democrats working diligently to take control of everything, the Republican comeback has begun. The party will be competitive again in 2022 and 2024. And you know who understands that? You know who knows the worm just turned? The 2 corporations who conspicuously decided not to sign the New York Times double truck ad calling for election reform opposition. Coca-Cola and Delta. Yeah, did y'all know that? That they had that big spread of the 100 corporations in the New York Times calling for opposition to voter reform measures. Coke and Delta did not sign on. They didn't add their name. They're now worried about tax implications here in Georgia from Republican payback, among other things. This is part of the problem with the media being in the bubble. Larry Sabato. Larry Sabato he's got his crystal ball. He's a prognosticator in Virginia. And Larry Sabato tweeted out the other day, the poor man is broken, I'm afraid. Larry Sabato tweeted out, the Republican Party hasn't been the party of Lincoln for decades. The GOP has become the party of Jefferson Davis, that is. This is the man who lives in Virginia with a governor who was either the man in blackface or the man in the Klan outfit. This is the man who lives in Virginia that put Cooter Jones on the ballot in 2002 and had Jim Webb represent him as recently as 2012, but somehow it's the Republican Party, the party of racists. The Democrats were the party of Robert Byrd, the leader of the KKK. Yet somehow it's the Republicans who are racist. Larry Sabato claims some level of objectivity. He claims some level of engagement. He claims some level of being a prognosticator, but he's been broken by politics. There's a lot of squabbling over the death of the Republican Party right now. The media is convinced, as are a lot of people, that the Republican Party is dying. But the reality is that the Democrats have problems as well, unless you're truly broken by politics or Trump. You got to acknowledge that neither party is dead. Both heal. Events change things. So when Larry Sabato says that the Republican Party is now the party of Jefferson Davis, Larry Sabato is all of a sudden big on the Republican Party needs to be wiped out. He passes as some sort of objective commentator, but he's not. He's been broken by Trump like so many others. Larry Sabato is on the left, has always been on the left, and now feels very comfortable openly being on the left, a man who made his business supposedly being an objective prognosticator of elections. We now know where his biases are and how he sees things. The reality is this: Donald Trump is going to go away by death or boredom at some point, and the GOP is going to stay around because ballot access rules make it very hard for a new third party to take root. New candidates on both sides, in both parties, will pull their parties in their direction. Likewise, on the Democratic side, they're struggling. The media is in the bubble with the Democrats. They can't even understand. You got the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez world out there. You got the moderate Democrats. You got moderate Democrats who are now being portrayed as racists by the wokes within the Democratic Party side for not wanting to defund the police. The Democrats have their own problems, but the media is in the bubble with the Democrats. They can't see the problems that they themselves have in their own bubble because of this sort of stuff. Now, the Republicans also get more exposure in the media, not just because they're in the Democratic bubble and not just because they want the end of the GOP and not just because they see the GOP as stymieing things like gun control and the Green New Deal, but also Donald Trump gets media attention. Donald Trump causes ratings. So, of course, they're going to highlight problems on the GOP side and tie them to Donald Trump, not just in an effort to hurt the GOP or to amplify narratives against the GOP, but because if they mention Donald Trump, people are going to pay attention. They're going to give him eyeballs, going to give him ratings. But if you haven't paid attention, the Republicans have been winning, and they're seeing demographic shifts in their favor. Now, the media has dismissed these as anomalous. Let's review the tape from 2020. The New York Times explained the drift of Hispanics towards the GOP this past year as these people like their strongman leaders that they fled from in Central and South America. I'm not making that up. The media literally, the New York Times, among others, literally explained the demographic shift of Hispanics towards the GOP as well. They like those strongman dictators they fled from. And why did young black men go to the GOP? Well, it's the toxic masculinity of the rap music. They like people like Trump. That was another actual explanation in the New York Times and other locations that black Democrats were shifting, particularly young men, were shifting to the GOP because of toxic masculinity. You can't make that stuff up. When David Shore, the progressive pollster, pointed out defund the police and socialism were not winning messages for the Democrats, they canceled him. They canceled one of their own. The left canceled one of their best pollsters because he dared to say defund the police and socialism were not winning messages in 2020. He turned out to be right. Of course, the media distracts from those stories that they've got to explain things. You can find the demography is destiny narrative came about after Richard Nixon's election. It was with gusto in 1972 72 after a second election. But really, in 1968, Richard Nixon won. He won against a far-left Democratic machine that was rioting in the streets of Chicago. And the media was fully on board the wokes at the time. The precursors to the wokes, the far left that was rioting in the streets of Chicago, the media loved them. They hated Richard Nixon. and they began to talk about the beginning of the end of the Republican Party. When Nixon won a second term in 1972, what is it? Pauline Kael, the reporter, says she couldn't believe he won. She didn't know anybody who voted for him. That was kind of the sentiment of the media as a whole. And they began with really renewed energy, talking about the Republican Party would be coming to an end. And every time a Republican has won the presidency, don't worry, the days of the GOP are coming to an end. Demography is destiny. Just be patient. George W. Bush and Donald Trump, they win. What do you hear? Well, they can't win with the popular vote in the country. They got to win with the Electoral College, which is illegitimate and an affront to our democracy. And demography is destiny, and they can't pick up minority voters. There's a story the other day about, I saw Stacey Abrams in Georgia, her top political consultant, pushing the story from The Atlantic that we're essentially getting to a point in this country where conservatives are trying to lock into power so the white minority can rule the country. The politics of despair. They can't see anything except through a racial lens. And when the racial lens starts twisting on them and giving them results they don't expect based on their demography as destiny idea, they got to come up with some way to insult the voters who are leaving the Democratic Party. The toxic masculinity, the like of the dictators. They can't see the problem themselves because they're in the bubble. There are problems on the Democratic side. The media doesn't want to talk about it. There are problems on the Republican side. The media wants to elevate those problems. One of the problems on the Democratic side right now is the border situation. Joe Biden locked into Donald Trump's his refugee numbers. You know, he campaigned on raising the number and then said he wouldn't last week. Well, now he's had to reverse himself. President Biden on Saturday explained his initial decision to not increase the limit on refugee admissions to the United States, saying that his administration couldn't do two things at once. Speaking to reporters in Wilmington, Delaware, at the end of a golf session Saturday, Biden explained that he couldn't initially increase the cap due to the burdens that the Office of Refugee Resettlement is facing because of an influx of unaccompanied child migrants on the southern border. We're going to increase the number. The problem was that the refugee part was working on the crisis that ended up on the border with young people. We couldn't do two things at once, but now we're going to increase the number. The comment comes a day after the White House reversed course on a decision to keep the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. at Trump-era levels. The decision was made following blowback from Democrats who wanted to see a higher cap. Biden signed an order on Friday maintaining the 15,000-person cap on refugee admissions for fiscal year 2021, a controversial number set by President Trump. It was far below the 62,500 cap Biden wanted in place for 2021. Democratic lawmakers blew it up. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called on the president to keep his promise. Ilhan Omar said it was shameful. Dick Durbin in the Senate said it was unacceptable. So now they're walking it back. On Saturday, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said the initial decision was due to changes made by Trump. Always Trump. Blame Trump. Blame Trump. It's always going to be Trump. Trump's fault. Trump's fault. So they did it on Friday, and they reversed it on Saturday. Say, oh, well, we fixed the problem. In 24 hours, we fixed the problem. The only people who believe this are in the media. By the way, you know, for as bad as polling is in this country, if we can get any sense of what's going on, do you know who hates the Biden border situation the most? Do you know what polling demographic is livid with what's happening at the border more than any other? Hispanic voters. No. It has nothing to do with them continuing to build a wall. It has nothing to do with them limiting the refugees. It has to do with Hispanic voters being livid that they're being as lax as they are. Hispanic voters who came to this country legally and went through the process to become American citizens are livid that these people are bypassing the rules and just trying to flood the border, and they're getting away with it. And Biden's letting them get away with it. They do not like it. They are livid with it. They are mad at Joe Biden, and they are siding with Republicans on the issue of the border. Now, have you heard that in the media? The polling is there. They're talking about the Pew numbers on Biden's job approval. They're ignoring the Pew numbers on Hispanic voters at the border. Why would that be? This goes back to the Newsbuster story that 59% of coverage of the Biden administration is fawning coverage by the media. They don't want to give him the bad news. They don't want to give you the bad news. But the reality is The Republicans are making inroads with Hispanics in this country because of law and order and the border. The two issues the Democrats cannot get away from left-wing orthodoxy on are the ones that are driving Hispanic voters to the right. Events, my friends, change things, and right now they're changing them badly for the Democrats.
News and in-depth analysis from
Well, how are the Anglo-Saxons today? Heard about this story? Welcome back. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. What is it? Punch Bowl, DC, came up with this story where let me find it now. Yeah. So yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene and a couple of members of the Republican conference in the House decided to look at create the America First Caucus. They had a logo and everything. It pictured George Washington, America's First Caucus, stars around it, established 2021. This is from Punch Bowl. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar, congressman from Arizona, have been distributing materials calling for a common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions and a return to an architectural style that befits the progeny of European architecture. Congressman Barry Moore of Alabama and Louis Gohmert of Texas have agreed to join the group, according to an email invitation obtained by Punch Bowl News. We've been covering Congress for a long time, and this is some of the most nakedly nativist rhetoric we've seen. Under the immigration section, it says America is a nation with a border and a culture strengthened by a common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions. History has shown that societal trust and political unity are threatened when foreign citizens are imported en masse into a country, particularly without institutional support for assimilation and an expansive welfare state to bail them out should they fail to contribute positively to the country, and on it goes. The America First Caucus will work toward and infrastructure that reflects the architectural engineering and aesthetic value that befits the progeny of European architecture, whereby public infrastructure must be utilitarian as well as stunningly, classically beautiful, befitting a world power and source of freedom. Our education has worked to actively undermine pride in America's great history and to actively increase hostility to the civic and cultural assimilation necessary for a strong nation. On it goes. You get the point. There was mass outrage on Capitol Hill. It was the Anglo-Saxon phraseology that made everybody mad. Now, if you're nodding along with their use of Anglo-Saxon, you probably need to study your history. Will they allow anyone named Norman to join their caucus? They probably won't be able to stop him because the Anglo-Saxons sure as heck couldn't stop the Norman invasion of of England. I mean, that's what we're getting at here. The Anglo-Saxon tradition kind of isn't exactly what they seem to think it is, given the rise of the Normans and the like, moving into Great Britain and into the English territory. What's really going on here is, listen, they want to try to find a way to make America great again. They want to try to find a way to focus on, by the way, it's neoclassical Greco-Roman architecture, not European architecture. European architecture is some of the worst architecture, at least in the 20th century. The brutalist architecture comes from Eastern Europe and the like. It's horrible. I'm okay with Gothic, but it doesn't really fit in. What they're really trying to go for is Greco-Roman, Greek revival, neoclassical. European architecture blanketly is just kind of dumb. And by the way, there's some beautiful Asian architecture out there. Asian and Islamic architecture is actually, some of it is gorgeous, and it would fit in just fine in certain circumstances. Well, the whole idea is now dead. Several people who were named as being a part of it came out and said, wait a second, we don't even know anything about this. Why have they put our name on it? And then Kevin McCarthy came out and blew it up and said, nativist dog whistles are unacceptable within the Republican Party. We're a party for all people, regardless of race, national origin, not just Anglo-Saxons. So now Marjorie Taylor Greene has had to come out and say, this was just a draft. It was now, okay. First of all, you do need to understand this. This is terrible spin for Marjorie Taylor Greene. First of all, she comes out and says, who are you to tell me what I can do? Then she comes out and says, we're launching this group anyway. Then she comes out and says, well, this was just a first draft. Then she comes out and said, y'all made it all up. It's not really true. I mean, the walk back has been stunning. For someone who says she tucked tail and ran on this. It's just ridiculous. The leadership was livid, apparently. Kevin McCarthy fuming significantly about this. Republicans in the Freedom Caucus apparently were furious that they would come up with this. They just ran with it and then had to blame the media, like the Jewish space lasers. So Marjorie Taylor Greene on Facebook speculated on Jewish space lasers setting wildfires in California. And now she denies that she ever said it. Was on her freaking Facebook page. And I was like, they made that up. The same people who made that up are making up this freedom, this America First caucus. I don't know anything about it. Yeah, you do. That just, I mean, if you're going to fight. But don't throw a punch and then tuck tail and run, lady. That's kind of even more embarrassing. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. All right, I'm gonna shake up the schedule and we'll get to Maxine Waters and Black Lives Matters and the like here in a minute. But I started thinking about this, and I've mentioned before, so I've got a 12-year-old son. It's time to have the talk. You don't want to have the talk. Now, my parents never had the talk with me. I had smart friends and encyclopedias. And a British nurse named Miss Lovett, who was the sex ed teacher. But you gotta, this is something to write a passage, I guess. And I struggled with it. So for those of you who don't know, let's be fully transparent here. What typically happens is your wife takes you out for the talk, and that talk is the talk that you have to have the talk with your son. And then you have to stress about it for weeks over, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to talk about this with the boy. What do I do? Listen, I am no expert, but I will tell you how I started it, and I did some theological grounding to get there. So I started out making a comparison with Jesus. Like, for example, this isn't controversial, but it doesn't get talked about in the pulpit. Do you know how Jesus knew he was the Son of God? The answer is he grew in wisdom and understanding. He didn't come out of the womb knowing he was the Son of God. Orthodox Christianity, and I realize some of you will find this really controversial, and it's not meant to be. You don't hear it from the pulpit, but go talk to your pastor, and he'll tell you I'm right. Orthodox Christianity, going all the way back to the days of Nicaea, believe that essentially Jesus was fully God and fully human. There was a firewall between the two. How could Jesus perform miracles? In the same way Moses and Elijah and the others, through the Holy Spirit. Jesus could read the Bible without sin, and therefore could read the virgin would bear birth to a child, and Mary tells Jesus the angel Gabriel comes to her, and he can put two and two together. He can read the Bible. He knows it's about him, but he believes it by faith in the same way we do initially. And eventually he gets to the mountain, and the devil tempts him and says, all of this is yours, as he starts his ministry and gets on his way out there. And so I'm explaining this to my son, that Jesus, at first, he believed himself to be the Son of God by faith. He grew in wisdom and understanding and knew this was to be true, as I want my son to grow in wisdom and understanding and know by faith Jesus is God, and that he needs to understand he is now getting to an age where he is no longer protected by his mom and me in such a way. And by this time we're in downtown Macon, and I'm kind of waving out into the city, and I said, the world's going to tell you all of this is going to be yours if you reject the way your mom and I have raised you, if you reject your belief, if you reject what we've raised you to be true. Even the Bible says that the world is going to tempt you into going with the world, and you will have a great life if you do, by and large. If you reject God, the people who do tend to be the successful celebrities of the day. And it's to some degree an act of mercy. This is literally the best they will ever have it. And for all of eternity, it's going to be very bad for them. And you need to accept, do you want the here and now great and eternity bad, or do you want the here and now okay with Jesus and eternity marvelous? So because the world's going to throw all sorts of temptations in your way to try to lure you away from the way your mom and I have raised you. And then I said, do you remember the story about Noah and Noah's family on the ark with him? And of course he did. And I said, do you know why Noah's sons and their wives were allowed on the ark? He said it was nothing they did. It's not that they loved God. The Bible says that Noah found favor with God. And so his children were allowed safe passage on the ark with him. And then when the ark settled and the waters received, they were kind of on their own, and they were held to account. I said, this is very much the same way I can tell you that as a child, because of your mom's and my faith, that if something were to happen to you and you were to die, you were going to go to heaven. But you're reaching the age of your own accountability now. You're reaching the age where you're going to have to make this walk with God yourself. It's not going to be on your mom and me and our faith giving you a pass. You're going to have to own it yourself. And I said, and then this comes to what you're going to experience now as your body is changing. And then we began the conversation. And I tried to set it up that way because I do take those things seriously. And then explain to him that he's reaching the point where hair's going to start growing. He's going to start shaving. His voice is going to deepen. He's going to go through growth spurts. He's going to start having mood swings. He's going to start having changes in his body. And then explain to him along the way that, and as this comes, these new temptations are going to arise, things you haven't experienced before, emotions you haven't experienced before, desires that you haven't experienced before. They're going to start happening, and they're going to start happening as you become interested in girls and as you start becoming a man, and your friends are going to try to pull you in certain directions, and you need to know at the outset, here's why these things are wrong. Not the most comfortable conversation to have. To some degree, I guess I feel very special in that our son has lived a rather naive and sheltered life, and all of this was new to him. He took it all in, did not ask a lot of questions, and then it was also a perfect transition into, now that you're headed into 7th grade next year, you also now need to start realizing that what you start doing grade wise is going to affect you, and you gotta figure this stuff out as well. And I think it all worked out reasonably well in that regard. I hope. I'm sure there were details I missed. I'm sure there's something that his mom probably wanted me to throw in that I missed, but it's not the easiest conversation. Let me just put it to you that way. That's how I started mine. Your mileage may vary on this stuff. I certainly take those aspects of it serious, and I certainly feel like I've got to emphasize to him that at some point he's got to be accountable for himself. And I think that's a message, by the way, that kind of gets lost in the world today. You've now got the situation in this country, not to grasp too far out there, but now you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 25. You can still, to some degree, be a dependent and things like that. At some point, we've lost the conversation that you've got to be held responsible for your own acts. Now, there are people who have hard lives. I know people, I can think of people I've dealt with in my life who had terrible parents from horrible backgrounds, went into lives of crime, and you can say, well, it's not really their fault because look at the horrible way they were raised, the people they were surrounded with by their parents, the things that happened to them. But ultimately, at some point, we as a society have to also accept that we individually are responsible for our outcomes. We individually, as a society, need to accept that things will happen to us and we will engage in behavior that is unacceptable. And you can objectively, through just objective. Now, I realize if you're into critical theory, there is no objective standard, but I think there are objective standards of this behavior is bad. And even though you were raised in a terrible situation, even though you've been product of abuse, maybe your dad was in jail, maybe he was missing, your family was collapsed, you were passed from family to family, you were abused, there are still within you the appreciation and recognition that there are some things that are wrong and bad and you should not do. And when you do them, you can't say, well, it was my past, it was my family, it was the way I was raised. You yourself are responsible. And if there's one terrible trend in our society today that we've got, it's this idea that you're not responsible because you're the product of your environment, and it was the environment or the class of people you were with this race. Like the woman the other day who wrote the story that even when it's the black man harassing the Asian woman or assaulting her, it's not really his fault, it's white supremacy's fault because the culture in which he was raised, he was oppressed, and now he's lashing out at another oppressed class because of the oppressor. That's BS. You got to be held accountable for your own behaviors. You've got to be held accountable for what you did. And if I can begin a conversation with my son about growing up and pointing out he is going to be held accountable for his behavior, and he needs to come to terms with who he is, and he needs to accept and make a conscious decision, whose team is he on? Because you got to decide at some point. And we keep, as a society, putting this off and letting kids grow up later and later and later and later. It's remarkable when you study older times. Kids who are 13 and 14 are suddenly getting married and having kids. And we're like, really? Not anymore. We allow breathing room, time to grow, time to get educated, time for bodies to fully develop, and all of that. We've put things off, and that's not a bad thing at all. But one of the bad things is we allow people to delay accepting that they have responsibilities individually in society, and they themselves have responsibilities to decide about their faith. They themselves have responsibilities to grow up and be part of something greater than themselves, or choose not to. And that's it. Look, I'm no expert. I've only got one kid. That's the only time I will ever have to do that talk. But that's how I went with it. Your mileage may vary. I throw this out there though because more than one person has emailed and asked, "If you had it, what did you do? How did you do it?" I'll leave out the specific details of discussions of bodies and the like. But that's where I went with it. It is no easy conversation to have. It really isn't. It's very awkward. Very awkward. I understand why some people try to put it off. I did, and then of course you have your wife tell you it's time, so you have to do what your wife tells you. She who must be obeyed must be obeyed.
Erick Erickson wades through the
Hi there. How are you? Welcome back. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. A friend of mine just sent me this. He can't believe it. It says, pigs must be flying. This is the lead newsletter email for the New York Times this morning. Guido Calabresi, a federal judge and Yale law professor, invented a little fable that he's been telling law students for more than 3 decades. He tells the students to imagine a God coming forth to offer society a wondrous invention that would improve everyday life in almost every way. It would allow people to spend more time with friends and family, see new places, and do jobs they otherwise could not do, but it would come with a high cost. In exchange for bestowing this invention on society, the God would choose 1,000 young men and women and strike them dead every year. Calabresi then asked the students, would they take the deal? Almost invariably, the students say no. The professor then delivers the fable's lesson. What's the difference between this and the automobile? In truth, automobiles kill many more than 1,000 young Americans every year. The total U.S. death toll hovers around 40,000 annually. We accept the toll almost unthinkingly because vehicle crashes have become part of our lives. We can't fathom a world without them. It's a classic example of human irrationality about risk. We often underestimate large chronic dangers like car crashes or chemical pollution and fixate on tiny but salient risks like plane crashes and shark attacks. One way for a risk to become salient is for this to be new. That's a core idea behind Calabresi's fable. He asked students to consider whether they would accept the cost of vehicle travel if it did not already exist. That they say no underscores the very different ways we treat new risks and enduring ones. I've been thinking about that fable recently because of COVID-19. COVID certainly presents a salient risk. It's a global pandemic that has upended daily life for more than a year. It has changed how we live, where we work, even what we wear on our faces. COVID feels ubiquitous. Fortunately, it's also curable. The vaccines have nearly eliminated death, hospitalization, and other serious COVID illness among people who have received shots. The vaccines have also radically reduced the chances that people contract even a mild form of it. Yet many vaccinated people continue to obsess over the risks from COVID because they are so new and salient. And then they interview people. For example, a professor who said that he's been fully vaccinated for almost 2 months and only recently decided to meet a vaccinated friend for a drink unmasked. It was hard, psychologically hard. There are going to be challenges to acclimating and re-entering, but we've got to do it. I don't understand why it's hard, but let's just accept for some people it is. But also, this goes back to the beginning of the show today. I do not think it is helpful for Anthony Fauci or anyone else, including the President of the United States, to be out there and say, get vaccinated and then don't go back to normal. The whole purpose of rushing people to get vaccinated was to go back to normal. At some point, the burden of risk has to be on the unvaccinated, not the vaccinated. Now, there are certainly parts of this country where there's still backlogs for vaccines. People want to get it and they can't. Pulling Johnson & Johnson, I continue to think was a mistake. Fauci said is probably going to come back with a warning. Good luck getting people to take it after all of that. 6 people out of 7 million, all women, got a rare blood clot. Yet they pulled it for everybody, made a big to do with it. That's a problem. I just think that the messaging from the top is bad at this point. Did you know, by the way, so Texas and Mississippi, they got rid of all of their mandates, and their cases are at all-time lows now. I shouldn't say at all-time lows. They're lower than any time since early last year. And you're not hearing a lot about that in the media. You know, this goes back to the Bill Maher show, Real Time on HBO. He pointed that out on Friday night, that Texas actually is doing a great job. And in fact, Texas is seeing declines in its viral rate, even as it's gotten rid of the mask mandate. I'm looking now at states where their cases are lower but going up. Mississippi cases are a very slight uptick in Mississippi. but not significant. In Texas, they continue to go down. Georgia's on the verge of seeing the cases go back up a little bit. But in, let's see, this is Texas. 35% of people have had at least one dose. 22% have had a full vaccination. The Texas decline is down. There's been a 15% increase in cases, but a 33% decrease in deaths. Hospitalizations are flat. And by the way, those increases by and large come from very, very rural counties of the Texas Panhandle and along the Texas border. So, for example, Webb County, Texas has one of the highest rates, 19 cases per day. Kearns County, south of San Antonio, has 20 cases per day. Not exactly significant. Georgia, likewise, is trending very, very well. It's flatlined in my county, for example. Georgia as a whole is doing well, and yet you're not getting any of the positive media coverage. And now you've got people out there. In fact, New York Magazine, let me pull this up. I just saw this. New York Magazine is running a story on the people who will never, ever get their masks off again. Michael Bizzaro, appropriate name, a Colorado teacher, told me that while he doesn't particularly enjoy wearing a mask, he's noticed health benefits beyond not getting or spreading COVID. Being a public school teacher, there are multiple times a year I get sick. Being in the presence of lots of teenagers, I get colds quite often. I'm affected pretty badly by seasonal allergies. Even though he's gone back to teaching in person, he told me, I have not had any sort of sickness, a cough, a sneeze, a fever, anything since the pandemic started. For Bizzaro, continuing to wear a mask in a post-COVID world is somewhat of a no-brainer. It's not even a minor inconvenience wearing a mask, so why not wear it in the future? Ben Rosenblum has been a germaphobe since middle school. The 23-year-old digital archivist told me, meaning he's afraid of uncleanliness and germs. A global pandemic, as it turns out, didn't quite exacerbate his condition as much as it substantiated it. If I go out somewhere and I touch crosswalk lights and stuff like that, and I have to open doors and everything, I don't feel like I'm insane for coming home and vigorously scrubbing my hands down. He took to mask wearing pretty quickly and has come to enjoy it. It does give you the sort of privacy that you're hiding half your face. Even after he's vaccinated and the pandemic ends, Rosenblum plans to continue wearing a mask in public. Let him. No shame. I seriously, no shame. Not going to ridicule him. No big deal. But the rest of us, why? Robin Argenti cannot yet envision a future in which she doesn't wear a mask. We don't know if it's going to be ever over. The 57-year-old resident of upstate New York said of the pandemic, she's in poor health and concerned that with the emergence of new variants and the millions of people who refuse to get vaccinated, the country's never going to overcome the coronavirus. You know what? If she wants to wear a mask, let her wear a mask. Let her wear it. If you don't want to get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. But if you want to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. And if you don't wear a mask, then don't wear a mask. Let the burden be on the unmasked. We have muddied this message terribly in this country. Businesses are suffering. People are suffering. Schools are suffering. Education is suffering. It's time to get back to normal as quickly as we possibly can. But I don't know that we're going to. glad you're joining me. You all, you do realize Mother's Day is coming up. Do you have a plan for Mother's Day? I got a recommendation for you, Omaha Steaks. If you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar, you'll see their Let's Go Grill package. Now, here's the important part of it. You'll get 12 burgers for free. Not only will you get 12 burgers for free, you'll get steak, you'll get pork chops. You can, instead of getting your mom something like flowers that are going to die or something that's just going to collect dust, cook, make a meal. In fact, with these 12 burgers, you can have a grill out for your mom for Mother's Day and invite over all of your slacker brothers and sisters and cook for mom and show off in front of them so you're the favorite. Or, I mean, make your mom steak, pork chops. They got the caramel apple tartlets. It's a good deal. And it's a great, great value. And if you order for the first time, you're going to get $20 off your order. It's a good deal. Go to omahasteaks.com today. Put Eric in the search bar. Plan for Mother's Day. Cook for your mom. Grill out for your mom and your family. Grill out for yourself if you want. You get 12 burgers for free at omahasteaks.com by putting Georgia in the search bar. It'll be good eats. What do we do about Maxine Waters? What do we do about her? She is out stirring up violence. You know, this is the woman who encouraged protesters to get in the faces of Republicans and drive them out of society, drive them out of wherever they were. Now she tells Minnesota Black Lives Matter protesters to get more confrontational. One day after violent anti-police clashes, she says you got to stay on the streets. She also says that I'm not happy that we've talked about police reform for so long. We're looking for a guilty verdict on the Chauvin trial. If we don't, we cannot go away. We got to stay on the streets. Now, what's ridiculous about this is that she can get away with doing this as a member of Congress in a way that no Republican would ever. The media will give her a pass. The Democratic leadership in Congress is going to give Maxine Waters a pass for stirring this up. By the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, fresh off abandoning her Anglo-Saxon effort, has drafted a resolution to boot Maxine Waters from Congress. Of course, it's not going to happen. She won't be expelled, but she's stirring up violence. And she doesn't care. She's sticking around until the jury comes back. And by the way, I'm wondering if, even if he's found guilty, if he's not found guilty of the harshest penalties, is that going to provoke violence? And how many of these jurors are living in fear? You know, remember in what is it, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota? The woman who's on city council voted to fire the city manager for saying that police officer Kim Potter needed due process. And the city councilwoman said, well, she agreed with the guy, but she had to vote against him because she's afraid what the protesters would do to her and her family if she didn't vote to fire him. What about the juries? Are the juries going to be persuaded by violence? Say, well, we better throw the book at this guy or our city burns. I mean, they probably should throw the book at him, but nonetheless, will they do it because of what the facts are or because they're scared of what will happen with the city? There are protests that have turned violent in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, Portland. This is my favorite one. I shouldn't say favorite, but just listen to me here. Police in Portland, Oregon, fatally shot a man in Lentz Park in Portland. There was an eruption. Angry Black Lives Matter protesters looted businesses. They set fire to an Apple store after cops shot a man at a local park. Now, I got to read you a key paragraph. Where is this? Here we go. This is from the Oregonian. They actually put this out on social media as well. The Oregonian, Oregon Live, typically does not identify a person's race unless it is relevant. However, the incident came in the wake of several high-profile fatal police shootings of black men elsewhere in the country. So the Oregonian, the newspaper out in Oregon, does not release the race of a person unless it's relevant. The Portland, Oregon police shot and killed a man in Lentz Park on Friday. And in light of the Black Lives Matter protest, the Oregonian does this in its newspaper and on its social media feed. The Oregonian, Oregon Live, typically does not identify a person's race unless it's relevant. However, the incident came in the wake of several high-profile fatal police shootings of black men elsewhere in the country. Several sources confirmed to the newspaper the victim in this case was a white man in his 30s. Investigators had yet to identify him Friday night, according to sources. The Oregonian newspaper, which doesn't identify race, went out of its way to say, hey, Black Lives Matter, white guy, don't burn us down. It was a white guy. Give us a pass. It was a white guy. This is the world we live in now. They've got to flag the race of the victim to keep Black Lives Matter from burning them down. They have caught the tiger by the tail. By the way, this is a growing law and order movement here, a law and order issue that is going to haunt the Democrats. They can't keep this stuff quiet. I mean, the national media doesn't have to cover this stuff. The local media does. Keep in mind, local media in this country, let's go back to the report. The New York Times reported on itself and others. A group of data scientists and sociologists got together and they reviewed overwhelmingly in this country. The national media COVID stories have been deeply, deeply, deeply negative. Overwhelmingly negative and hostile. And local media has not. Local news stories in local outlets have not been relentlessly hostile like the national media stories. And, you know, I can tell you this myself. I've seen research at local radio station research around the country in multiple places that local audiences want positive stories. They're tired of all the negative, depressing stories. They want to be uplifted at some point, and the national media is not giving them that. But local media is, and local media still penetrates more than national media in a lot of this stuff. And so what's happening now is the media cannot relentlessly hide the Black Lives Matter's violence. The national media cannot hide from you that Black Lives Matters is burning down cities across America. It's not white supremacists out there burning these cities down. It's not Trump supporters out there doing it. It's Black Lives Matters. And the media is hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil approach to it. The local media is covering the stuff. And, you know, the irony in all this is it actually further undermines people's faith in the national media because they're more and more aware of the fact that the national media isn't telling them the full story. Like the Ron DeSantis situation, how CBS News really edited, blackballed, smeared Publix grocery stores and Ron DeSantis in Florida. And there was enough outrage about it on social media that, I mean, this is why media outlets want Facebook and Twitter to ban people and censor stuff, because they do not like the alternative. They don't like the fact that you and I can share these stories. They don't like Substack, where I've got my daily newsletter, because I can report a story on Substack that the media doesn't want to cover, and it gets the attention of hundreds of thousands of people pretty immediately, and then talk about it on this radio show and exponentially grow the information. That's why they hate conservative talk radio. That's why they hate Fox News. Any outlet that can bypass the media and tell a story that differs from what the media wants you to know, the media hates. They send Brian Stetler out to frown on them. It's not going to work. By the way, speaking of DeSantis, DeSantis is fighting back against Major League Baseball, corporate America, and the wokes. He was on Fox News talking about this.
These businesses, I guess they have the right to do what they want, but if you're going to stick your beak into issues that don't directly concern you, then I think elected officials are then going to stick their beak into issues that may not concern them. And so if you are a Major League Baseball, you're saying you have to move out of Atlanta because they're having voter ID. Well, what about all the other jurisdictions that you're in that have, quote, more restrictive laws? What about the fact that you're doing business with the Communist Party of China? The fact that you've done business with the Castro regime in Cuba? It doesn't make sense. I think corporate America, by trying to genuflect to this wokeness, I think they've gone down a really bad road. They're going to tie themselves in knots trying to please the extreme left. What I've told people is, if the left is after you, the minute you buckle, you're just painting a bullseye on your back. They're going to keep coming back and back and back. If you just stand your ground, yeah, they'll complain for a couple days, then they'll move on to the next outrage. And so I think some of these corporate CEOs, they need to grow some backbone, and they need to be willing to stand up and not get pushed in to taking these positions, which is, Maria, as you indicated, it's not based on facts. They're basically accepting very partisan left-wing narratives and fashioning policy based on that without actually citing the key provisions of the law that they're so offended by.
He's not wrong. The amazing, relentless willingness of corporate America to bow to the wokes it's alarming. People that I've got friends of mine who they're not in politics. They don't pay attention to politics. They know what I do for a living, but they're not really engaged in talk radio, conservatism, and they're paying attention to what happened in Georgia. They're paying attention to the NBA and Major League Baseball and their dealings with China. They're paying attention to a lot of this stuff in ways I didn't expect them to. And it's turning them more towards our side than I think the left understands. And I don't know that polling is a reliable indicator of much in this country anymore, but my sense is that cancel culture, wokeness, the transgender fight and the like will do more to help the GOP win back suburban voters who left them for the Democrats than anything else. Now, there'll be a segment of them that don't come back because they've gone woke. They have gone, they've gone so far left. But I think that this is going to become problematic for the Democrats over time. I think this is going to become a situation where voters realize that if they go along with the mob, that they're going to be cutting their legs out from under them. It really is remarkable to me to see the Democrats overplay their hand in this way. It is remarkable to me to see the wokes think that everyone is going to bow to them. And yet they do. The media certainly does. The Biden administration is bowing to the wokes. They want to introduce critical theory into public schools across America. You're going to see more and more parents leaving public schools between COVID and lockdowns and this critical theory BS. More people homeschool their kids, and then they're going to come for the homeschoolers. You know they'll come for the homeschoolers. They hate the homeschoolers. They hate the fact that a parent may be able to educate a child at home without the wokes having any say on it. But then people will go in the ballot box. And in the ballot box, they'll vote against the wokes. Now, part of what's going to happen here is that the wokes are going to scream voter fraud. The wokes are going to claim the election was stolen because they won't be smart enough or they'll be willful about it when people are standing up saying, yeah, we're with you, and then they go in the ballot box and they vote against it. It's like, have you seen the polling? National Public Radio is highlighting a national poll that Americans are violently opposed to Republican efforts against transgender, the transgender sports bans and the like. The public hates them. How dare the Republicans do this? So many people are opposed. It's like, remember, there were poll after poll after poll after poll that showed Americans were super supportive, highly super supportive of gay marriage back in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s. And then people would actually go vote and it would always lose. In North Carolina, PPP, the Democratic pollster, headquartered in North Carolina, put out a poll, showed overwhelming support for gay marriage in North Carolina. It lost in North Carolina like 2-1. And the pollsters for PPP came out and said, this question is a question that you're not going to get an accurate result on. I suspect the same thing with transgender. You don't want to talk to the pollster and tell the pollster that you're against the wokes. The pollster might be woke. They may send the mob to your house. I mean, for God's sake, you got the reporters in Utah showing up at a paramedic's house because he gave $10 to the legal fund for Kyle Rittenhouse, and they're trying to ruin the guy, get him fired from his job. People publicly are going to be standing with the wokes and privately voting against them. And the wokes are going to say, well, the election must be stolen because the polling shows we're going to win. The only poll that matters is the one in the ballot box, and you people are going to go down in flames because you're not trying to convince people anymore. You're trying to silence the opposition. You're trying to censor the other side. And if nothing else, Americans hate that. They hate you hogging the town square. They don't like the preacher in the town square with a bullhorn telling them they're going to hell. They certainly don't want the wokes in the town square telling everybody they got to shut up or else. Americans simply don't like to be bullied. And they may grin and bear it in public, and in private, they're going to seethe with resentment and vote these people out and undermine their policies at the ballot box and support politicians who are willing to wage war. Don't believe me? Look at Donald Trump in 2016. What happened there? He got elected. Why? Because people didn't like Hillary Clinton, and they sure didn't like the Democrats telling them how to live their lives.
He doesn't just have a radio show. Eric has a...
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. So have y'all heard the big push down in Texas? Greg Abbott looks like he's going to run again. There are no term limits for governor in Texas. And Matthew McConaughey is being polled. And voters say that Matthew McConaughey would be super popular. You know, the actor, Matthew McConaughey, that he would be a strong, formidable candidate against Greg Abbott. Now, this, of course, presumes he would run as a Democrat. It presumes he would run. He has hinted in the past about running for office, maybe running for governor. Didn't say when. And I'm just not so sure that that's the case. So what does Matthew McConaughey stand for? What's his position on attracting jobs to Texas? What's his position on, I don't know, taxes, education, homeschools, the virus, the pandemic, the National Guard, the border? What are his positions? Anybody? Anybody got an idea? Because it's really, really great and easy. Fantastic to say that actor X, who's super popular and everybody likes and has been on a number of great films, that he would beat Greg Abbott, except he hasn't actually given. And, you know, this is one of the things with rich people, not just actors. A lot of rich people decide they're going to get into politics because they got the money to burn and they can boost their name ID, and everyone with the highest positive name ID tends to win. That's actually the trick. The person with the highest positive name ID tends to win. And so the rich person comes in and they flood the zone with money, but they've never actually been on the campaign trail. They've never actually been out there. This is why primaries are good. Primaries are good because it makes candidates do better, or they fail. There's a sink or swim mentality in primaries that's necessary. You're either going to do well or you're not. And it's a no-brainer to really say it that way because you get out on the campaign trail. Take Kelly Loeffler here in Georgia. Kelly Loeffler, multimillionaire, billionaire family. She and her husband own the New York Stock Exchange. She runs for office. She had to get good on the campaign trail, and there were a period of months where she did zero publicity whatsoever to get up to speed. And even then, she was a little rough around the edges. When she got out there, she got more and more comfortable as time went on. It takes time to do that. She was able to beat Doug Collins in the primary. She lost to Warnock in the runoff. She may come back. She's building this new outside group, but she's gotten more comfortable. You hear the Kelly Loeffler of today talk compared to the Kelly Loeffler of a year ago. It's a completely different person. Completely different person. It took her time to get comfortable on the campaign trail. Matthew McConaughey is an actor. An actor can go out and he can say lines. He can certainly memorize a speech, but it's the off-the-cuff remark that gets you. And when the media comes out and says, oh, look, we did a poll, and this person would be great to go against Greg Abbott. This, by the way, is not a poll of Matthew McConaughey people wanting Matthew McConaughey to run. This is a wishful thinking poll of the media trying to induce someone who could possibly beat Greg Abbott. And it's wishful thinking. By the way, can I just say at this point, we kind of know that some of the stuff just doesn't work polling anymore. It just doesn't seem to work. It just doesn't seem to work. I bet you something that would poll terribly, though, is getting rid of bail. Or actually, it would poll positively, but the reality is it's not great. The man charged with trying to shove an Asian undercover cop onto a Queens subway track was cut loose without bail on Sunday as the judge claimed my hands are tied. Suspect Ricardo Hernandez, 32, who faced 3 hate crime charges in the attack on an unnamed cop on a Long Island City train platform around 5:30 p.m. Saturday, has had 12 prior arrests. At Hernandez's arraignment over the attempted push onto the tracks, Queens Superior Court Justice Louis Knock said the state's bail reform measure barred him from holding Hernandez in jail. My hands are tied because under the new bail rules, I have absolutely no authority or power to set bail on the defendant for this alleged offense. Under the new measure passed last year, attacks that cause no injury are exempt from bail in New York. So he tried to kill a cop by throwing him onto a subway line rail track. You know, with the third rail, you touch it, you die. The guy's got 12 prior arrests, and he got out of jail because New York banned bail. I bet the polling on getting rid of bail polled very well, but you tie it to this result, and I bet you the polling would reverse if we get accurate polling. The idea that people are binding themselves to polls anymore in this country, given what we've seen over the last couple of years, probably not a good idea for them to do it. And that the left is doing it so much actually gives Republicans a real opportunity to move forward and win again, surprising everyone.